Yeah, I will kick us off. Hello, everyone. Thanks for putting where y'all are joining from, just because looks like we have quite a bit of we have Illinois, we got Washington, Indiana. So thanks all for joining. And we're thrilled to have you here today for our Farm Budgeting and Planning Made Easy webinar. We really designed this to equip you with a practical framework that our partners and every accountant we think should know. In this session, we'll be unveiling some key strategies that we've seen empower our CPA partners to excel in their advisory areas, and we can't wait to show you how maybe that can benefit your practice. And then we'll be sure to address any questions you have. Feel free to throw them in the webinar chat or in the Q&A feature, and we'll hopefully get to them live, or I'll be responding to them via those two areas. But I'll go ahead and just to start off, Mitch, I'm going to pass it to you. We'll do some quick introductions.
Awesome. Yeah, as Aaron said, thanks everyone for jumping on. We're excited to share a couple ideas with you as well. And yeah, the main purpose today, it's real casual, real conversational. And like Aaron said, any questions, please chuck them in the Q&A. And if we can't get to them today, we'll certainly be able to reply to you straight after as well. So look, my name's Mitchell Parks. I'm one of the account executives currently based here in Denver, Colorado. I originally grew up farming with my family in southern New Zealand on a sheep and beef property with just under 5,000 stock units before we made the transition into dairy in the late 2000s. So as I moved through high school and university, I for some reason really enjoyed accounting and finance, and so graduated with a BCom there and worked in a rural accounting firm for a number of years in New Zealand in their ag team. So did that for a while before joining the team at Figured. And yeah, I've obviously worked originally with our partners and accounting firms across New Zealand, but now up in the United States, been up here for just over a year now, which is quite crazy to think about, but loving it up, loving the Colorado lifestyle, but also getting to work with, accountants, advisors, farmers across North America as well. It fulfills a really big part of who I am, and working with people in the industry. So yeah, really passionate about it. Excited to hopefully meet some of you and talk more with you going forward. But yeah, I'll let Erin quickly introduce herself as well.
Yeah, so I'm Erin. I am Mitch's American counterpart here in Denver, Colorado. Been with Figured for 2 years now. Can't believe that. But prior, I worked at Zero Cloud Accounting, so have been working with accountants, helping implement the cloud and manage change management since graduating about 6 years ago now. But I get to help practices across the US and get to combine my Midwest Corn Belt roots with helping accountants, which I really enjoy. And then when I'm not co-hosting webinars, I love trying new restaurants and then, you know, maximizing all that Colorado has to offer, camping, skiing, rafting, all the things that the Midwest, can touch on, but out here is really the real deal. So that's really fun. But today we're incredibly fortunate actually to have on our friend and true expert in farm accounting, Paul Neiffer. He is a CPA with extensive experience specializing in income taxation and accounting services for farmers in agribusiness, author, podcast host, everything under the sun. So I'll pass it over to you, Paul, just for a brief intro.
Yeah, I would say these days I'm probably more of a thought leader than trying to be a practicing CPA. But yeah,
Sure.
I actually grew up on a wheat farm in southeastern Washington State. Matter of fact, still own farmland in Washington, Iowa, and Missouri. So I actually do a fair amount of farm accounting for my own self. But as Aaron and Mitchell had said, I've been blogging since 2009, so it's over 16 years now. I've done a podcast. Matter of fact, Aaron and Mitchell have been on that podcast. Write a column for Top Producer, and many of you probably have attended one of my farm tax updates over the years. So I'll leave it at that.
Perfect.
Yeah, love it, Paul. Awesome. Cool. Well, so why are we here today? We would love to kind of chat for the next hour and just pick each other's brains. But to be honest, we really do want to use this time to talk about how the farming's complexity uniqueness and volatility, really makes effective budgeting and forward-thinking financial management incredibly tough, which I'm sure if you're on here today, you've had a taste of that. Frankly, agricultural financial management, especially concerning technology, is often behind other industries and verticals that some of you may be specializing in. Too many farmers are still really wrestling with receipts and shoeboxes or cumbersome spreadsheets or, a number of random things they've written on throughout their harvest or livestock season, which really just isn't a good foundation for strong planning. So that's why Figured exists. We've been around for about a decade now, really trying to equip you and your farming clients with specialized tools for agriculture's specific budgeting and planning needs. We're excited to demonstrate today a little bit of the platform, and also really excited to have Paul in here for his commentary and insights on that, just things happening today with planning and budgeting. We understand, Paul, you have a deep understanding and unique insight on the financial challenges and opportunities in farming. So we're excited to touch on that today. And then we do understand that, implementing budgeting and planning may involve a change. And, the summer is a great time to do that. But we understand too, sometimes it feels like there's never the right time. But the time really is absolutely ripe for farmers and accountants to be working as a farming team and implementing changes like this. And we hope that the planning and budgeting piece you'll see after today really is a non-negotiable. And Mitch is going to tell you a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and so look, let's sort of really, I guess, dive into why we think planning and budgeting for more of your ag clients isn't just a good idea, but in my opinion, as Aaron touched on, is actually just a really becoming more and more of a non-negotiable. And a lot of that comes down to the very dynamic and often unpredictable environments that farmers are going to be operating in. There's the obvious, market volatility, changing commodity prices. We know they can swing from extremely good to extremely bad in a matter of about 5 minutes. And that can be influenced with its global events, trade policy, demand shifts. It feels like we're always walking a bit of a tightrope in that aspect. So you add to that changing input costs from fuel and fertilizer as well. There's a lot of change, and it's not always easy to predict. So they're not necessarily minor expenses either. They're going to be core to a farm's, operational outlay, and more often than not will eat directly into potential profits as well, depending on what way they're swinging. So throw in the weather. We can't. That's one thing that is, at the end of the day, that's out of our control. Whether it's a drought, a flood, having a plant late, anything like that as well. Patterns are always tricky to predict. And that's going to have an ultimate impact on whether it's yields and quality as well. So we also know that there's those conversations that we're having with banks as well, and I'm sure plenty of you on this call have had a situation where you've had a client that's in need of a loan, an update on their line of credit, something like that. But then the bank wants saying, we need those really clear, articulated financial projections. Where are they? And more often than not, it ends up with them knocking on your door saying, guys, I need it tomorrow, or I need it yesterday. That's a really common scenario, but we know that lenders more and more are starting to demand those really robust budgets, cash flow forecasts, updates on your position on where that particular farming business is standing today. And without that, securing the capital or any of those adjustments is getting harder, and ultimately that impacts a farmer's ability to even operate, let alone grow and adapt to any of those changes that we might have just touched on there. So, budgeting, planning, in my opinion, they aren't just good practices. They're really essential tools for securing your financial lifelines, and relying on gut instinct alone, it can usually be a pretty good guide on where you're standing. It's becoming not enough. And, experience obviously is invaluable and is key to making the right decisions at the right time. But it needs to be backed up by, those solid numbers and forward-looking plans and forecasts as well. Paul,
Yeah, and Mitchell, I was
yeah.
actually going to jump in because I agree with you. I think most farmers to some degree view the budget as, hey, the bank wants it, they'll prepare it for the bank and then they throw it away almost. They're not really using it as a management tool. They're just doing it because the bank compliance department is
Yep.
saying, hey, we have to have that budget in order to do the operating line renewals. So now for farmers that understand how it can be a management tool, they're going to use it dynamically. And I know we're going to talk about that, but I just want to reinforce that most of the farmers that I have talked to or dealt with that really maybe are not the most successful farmers, they just do it because the bank wants them to do it. They don't do it because they view it as a management tool.
Yeah, and exactly. And there's an element of change that's probably going to need to happen there as well. But I think based on that, those comments, Paul, as well, where do you potentially see some accountants and advisors starting to play, a real key role in those farming teams as we look at maybe potential opportunities and changes in the industry based on what's happening in those, credit institutions, or just actually having an idea of, where that farm business is standing?
Yeah, so like you say, it is becoming more critical that there is a team, because again, farmers, they want to plant, they want to combine, they don't want to sit there and crank out a bunch of numerical data for them either to use internally or to use for the bank. So that's what we're finding. You're definitely going to have a team.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think, excuse me, uh, some research we did a while back probably backs up that statement as well. It was saying that we surveyed a large bunch of farmers and clients across our global network, and 83% of those came back saying that their accountant, they consider them extremely valuable or really valuable as part of their team when they've been provided those client advisory services, and those forward-thinking things like planning, budgeting, all those sorts of things, compared to only 23% who receive just basic tax and bookkeeping services found their accountant and advisor to be a really valuable part of their farming team. So that's quite a stark contrast, from 23% to 83%. And the only difference was those, in a lot of cases, just simple budgeting and planning services. They viewed them as part of that team. So I think there's a massive opportunity, and personally believe, there's a real chance to step proactively into being data driven with insights as a way for CPAs to support their farmers and clients more. So, you can use that data that you're collecting from a basic compliance perspective anyway. Compliance isn't going anywhere. We're still going to need to compile a tax return at the end of each year. But then let's use that data and information to create some more of those what if scenarios to look into the future for different yield outcomes, market shifts, increases or changes in specific costs. We can really quickly help farmers, I think, understand break-even points and make, informed decisions backed up with data, not compared to just the gut feel and going, well, let's just see how this season goes compared to the last. And we've got plenty of examples in there. We know a partner based in Kansas who a few weeks back was able to secure a $1.25 million line of credit with their client because it was backed up with that relevant, up-to-date information from their cloud accounting tools that, they were compiling anyway, but they were moving more into that proactive. They were looking forward to help them secure that. And I think, a lot of advisors are really, really well positioned to teach and tailor their services to those clients and farmers to educate them on what the best practices could be and how they could really grow their operation. I know that many of you on this webinar today will have really, really great, commercial experience delivering advisory and working with a wide range of clients, and probably have a lot of farm experience in your teams as well. So it's all about unlocking it in a scalable way to support your clients compared to maybe more of a white glove service. How do we get it out to the rest? But then this is probably quite an interesting set as well that I think, Erin, do you want to talk more to this one?
Yeah. Yeah. So since, end of tax season, we have been working with a number of CPA societies, and recently on our Indiana CPA Society webinar, over 50% of the accountants told us that, their farming clients aren't budgeting at all. So, there is a need there and necessity, and it's sort of being neglected. Like we touched on, this isn't just a statistic, and this, of course, is just with, our attendees from this webinar, but it is evident in other conversations we've had. It truly is an untapped opportunity. On one hand, it is a massive chance for farmers to finally, be proactive and get a better grip on their financial performances. But on the other hand, it really is a significant opportunity for you all to, again, be a part of that farming team and step in to provide this, much needed support, deliver high value services, and directly grow your own business. And in a lot of senses, get to work on things that are actually intriguing, engaging, and interesting to y'all, outside of just of the tax and compliance space of your practices. So what do we find is really holding people back from, wanting to implement budgeting and planning? And from our experience, it really comes down to a few barriers. The incomplete or unreliable data you've probably seen, in the loan renewal process, and don't really see how you could scale this opportunity with your farmers. They're probably bringing you a bunch of papers, lots of information, elevator receipts. So again, having that kind of maybe unreliable data feeling. Also, huge issue of time and bandwidth. I mean, both farmers and yourselves are incredibly busy. So traditionally, budgeting has become, complex, time consuming, usually a project at, maybe tax time or for a specific inquiry from them. So it just feels really daunting to want to implement an actual service line or add, small planning or budgeting to what you're already offering to them. Thirdly, again, not knowing where to begin. Farmers might feel themselves that, they lack the financial expertise or feel that their current budget is enough for them. For accountants, it's obviously unsure about, how would we price this, or how would we tailor our traditional services to adding a budgeting aspect, especially to the unique complexities of agriculture. And then lastly, it kind of just ends up being in the too hard basket. We're doing the tax, we're doing the compliance. Maybe we're producing a small, budget for them, but it's maybe too difficult with our generic systems to implement something at scale. I guess, Paul, where have you seen people really neglecting or, being shy to incorporating this type of service offering if really there is such a necessity for it?
Yeah, I think again, there is no one correct answer on that. I find even large farm operations sometimes don't do a good job of budgeting. And then I find smaller farm operations that do a great job of budgeting. So there is not a one size fits all for whether they're doing a budget or not doing a budget. I think your listing of the common barriers, certainly those are definitely going to be the top ones that come to mind. So essentially we have to sort of break down those barriers if we can, and try to help them understand. And for me, it is that management tool. I want farmers to understand that if you do a good job of using the budget, especially on a prospective basis, not a reactive basis, but a prospective basis, it's going to be a great management tool for you to understand where your business is at and where it's going to go.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So what we're really seeing then is, up to 50% of farmers really are not doing it at all. So huge missed opportunity from the farmer and the advisor. Secondly, they do it in their heads. So they feel that that's sufficient until they need it for a loan or, a large complex project. Or, you are doing it, but it's in pretty complex spreadsheets. It's being passed between the whole entire farming team, or maybe there's a disjointment between the farmer and the advisor, and there's edits. You don't trust the data coming through. But ultimately, none of these approaches really would allow you to be able to scale this and provide this as an actual service offering, and become meaningful at scale. So really, neither way allows accountants or advisors to provide budgeting and planning to support their entire farming client base. And, there's different ways of doing it. There's different tools, which really just is a nightmare to try to begin something like this and feel you're actually having an effect on your farmers operation. So now for many of you, this webinar, many of you probably are already offering, a level of budgeting or planning services. So this slide might resonate a bit more. But if you're using a generic accounting software, whether it's desktop or even some cloud tools, you quickly run into the limitations that agriculture has. This doesn't simply provide the functionality you need, and none of them were built for the volatility and complexity of the ag industry. So we've seen a lot of people coupling it up with a generic system that is very complicated. It's very manual to try and, do this budgeting and do this planning. So we've seen, there's a ton of manual overhead, double entry. It's incredibly time consuming for, usually multiple people on the team that's doing this advisory. It's highly prone to error because of that double entry and, the crossing between many team members. And like we talked about this, Paul, a lot of the budgeting done now is extremely reactive. It's only done when asked for. It's not really being used as, a management tool. And then ultimately, it's impossible to scale across multiple people because it is so usually customized and a complex spreadsheet, for example. So you can't deliver really consistent, high quality services and data. And then for those who are, seeing advisory as an opportunity, maybe you're not doing this already. Perhaps you don't know where to begin. Maybe you've heard of your colleagues or other practices implementing it, but it's a very common hurdle we've seen for accounting firms, which is, how would I actually build out this service offering for my farmers that, makes sense? We feel we're, making a profit, we're making a difference in our farmers' lives. And then as well, beginning to start, what specific actions you need to take to make, very viable service offering and outputs that your farmers actually even finding valuable. We've seen that a lot as well. And then lastly, the good news is though, the area that we have a lot of experience and have worked with a lot of CPA practices that have implemented this at scale. And I'm sure, Paul, you've seen, with your background in CLA that it is possible. And a lot of firms are doing this. But if you don't take the time now to implement something, there are hidden costs of, not overcoming these challenges and seeing what kind of offers you can give to your
Yeah,
farmers.
that's exactly it, Aaron. I think, we don't, at the end of the day, we don't want to be limiting a growth opportunity by getting bogged down and whether it's manual data, complex spreadsheets. The reality is we won't have the time or the capacity to take on new clients or expand, what we're providing with our existing ones. But then it's also, it limits our potential to grow with those real clients as well. The inefficiency is going to keep us stuck being reactive, compliance focused. It's going to prevent us providing that really proactive, forward-looking insight to our farming clients as well that we know they need, and we know they probably want it to a point as well. But A, maybe they're not asking, and B, you're not necessarily wanting to offer it just because you're not quite sure where to really get into it, and that is ultimately leaving everyone vulnerable. You haven't got those accurate, timely budgets and forecasts. We're relying on gut instinct. We're relying on old historical data to make decisions that we should be making with current data and current information. So ultimately as well, there's a chance that it starts to erode your competitive advantages. Maybe some firms do look to offer more of this and start to get into it, start to make it a real point of difference for them. Maybe there's a chance that clients start to look at other options. And I guess, Paul, these are probably some of the high level potential hidden costs. Where do you maybe see some more opportunities for implementing change if some of these we were able to jump on top of?
Well, I think the key that I see sometimes whenever we're dealing with a client that is not used to something is to try to make it easy. If you give them too much too quickly, you're going to have them go tilt. So I think the key is to start with sort of the low hanging fruit. And I think
Mm.
certainly helping a farmer understand budgeting and how to get started and how to use the tools that are available, especially if we're discussing figured, then that makes it easier and more likely that they're going to accept it and embrace it.
Yeah.
If you make it too complicated, it's not going to work very well.
That's exactly it, and I think that's what we really want to get into now, is talking about having a really clear, repeatable process, that's going to ultimately allow you to deliver those high value services, but in a much hopefully simpler way, but a valuable way that means you can start to have more of the right discussions at the right time, with your clients and your partners as well. So this is this is a framework that we've sort of really worked on and developed, across our network of partners, obviously in North America, but across our international markets as well. And we think it's breaking down a pretty daunting task into what we think are 3 pretty manageable stages. So basic, intermediate, and detailed. And whether you're helping a client get started with just really simple cash flow estimates, or building out really detailed multi-year forecasts, market updated balance sheets, all that sort of thing, I think this framework should be able to help you deliver the right level of support, but do it efficiently and really accurately, as well. So the idea here of this framework as well is that it's twofold. For those of you already offering budgeting and planning, we want to be able to solve those efficiency issues to help you scale it more, remove some of the manual tasks, standardize your processes, and better serve those clients that you're already providing this for. And then for those of you who maybe you're wanting to get into space, want to learn a little bit more, but don't necessarily know where to start, hopefully this framework provides that clear starting point, guiding you every step of the way with defined deliverables, data requirements, and what you're going to be getting out of that as well. So over the next few slides, what we're going to do is sort of dive into each one of these, and then we want to tie it back to a practical solution within the Figured platform as well. So the idea being, yep, let's understand at a theoretical level, but let's really see how those concepts can be applied and utilized across your team as well. So the first one is basic. Erin, do you want to run us through this a little bit?
Yeah, so we've seen the basic budgeting kind of attack really help manage those who you don't know where to start, you don't know maybe what outputs to deliver. You're still looking to manage the time of implementing something like this at scale. But it's really going to be for those that are maybe smaller, less complex farms, or those who are new to formal budgeting. What do you need? You're really all you're going to need is last year's profit and loss and a straightforward revenue cost assumptions for the coming year. So, if they know their fertilizer costs, irrigation, kind of just those main input costs. And then really, like Paul mentioned, keeping it as simple as possible is the key. How can we slowly introduce them to something like this that it'll be sustainable and it just becomes a part of their yearly interactions with you. And then the outputs are a working budget and a basic cash flow. So they'll have a month-to-month budget for the upcoming harvest season, and then they'll have a basic cash flow that they can refer back to. It's not in deep detail, but it is very high level and something they can definitely utilize when doing their planning. And then the types of conversations you would have, the budget is gonna, probably spark cash discussions, boost their margin awareness for each of their profit centers, or, they're just full enterprise operation. And then it's gonna also just help them with much better bank conversations. So instead of you reactively doing a budget for them for this maybe a loan renewal process, they're already getting this yearly from you. So they have that to be able to go into those conversations with. And we found that even just the small output is a big, leap forward to them and giving them more autonomy over their finances that before maybe they didn't really feel that they had. So Mitch is now going to walk you through really how you'd be able to do this in Figured.
Yeah, cool. And one thing as well, maybe worth picturing is, excuse me, imagine this is sort of the blank, this is a blank slate for the year ahead. Is that, you know, assuming we've got that last year's historical information in here, let's just roll that over to be the starting point of our budget for the new season. We know that if it happened last year, there's a good chance that something similar is going to happen again this year. That's the joys of a good farming cycle. And we can bring that in and use that. Let's just have that as our baseline. That's our foundation for building out, you know, the rest of the year ahead. So import that. We start to get an idea of, you know, where do we start to spend our money monthly, you know, last year based on what's really happened. And take an example like seed and plants. Maybe we know that we've got an extra month that we're going to have to pay a little bit more, enter it in and grow it out from there. But, you know, if we just know that, look, this year we know it's probably going to be about 8% higher for our seed bill this year, chuck it in there and get a real quick idea of, well, how's this going to impact my not only my annual closing cash balance, but at a monthly level as well. You know, we can really start to factor in the seasonality changes as well. If you want to spread a particular cost on a curve of last year, you know, we knew that 2024 was a really good example of our payment structure for that season. We know that farming is not a linear process when it comes to paying bills and building things out over a whole year. So, you know, let's use that, take an annualized figure, but make sure we spread it out based on how we actually paid that in the prior year. So, you know, some of those more variable costs, for example, seeds or vet bills if you're running, you know, cattle operations, anything to do with livestock as well. But you know, we can really get into the detail really quickly at a monthly level and build out something that's going to give us, you know, that really clear analyses over the coming year. What is my cash position at the end of each month? Am I going to have shortfalls? Do I need to be making, you know, particular adjustments in those particular months to make sure I get through the year, you know, in the right sense? All the while that you're building this out, and then as we start to reconcile those actuals as they happen, you know, throughout the year, we can start to build out our variance reports and track, you know, how are we doing against our plan this year? Do we need to make changes for the rest of the year ahead? So in this case, I'm just looking at how I'm tracking year to date versus my forecast year to date. If I want to look at, you know, this month versus the forecast month, really drill into the details, we can start to do that. And, you know, you start to get an idea. Here's my annualized plan. In this case, I was planning on selling planning on selling $51,000 worth of cattle. We've reconciled and sold 47. So we've got a $4,000 variance there. Okay, it's just a real quick analysis. We can look at it, go, yep, we're a little bit behind on there, but maybe we're ahead in other areas as well. I saved a little bit of money on the calves that I've purchased in this year as well. So we want to be able to set that budget up at the start of the season and then analyze and adjust throughout the rest of the year as well, because things happen. We can go back into the grid and type in for the next 6 months. Actually, we know that things have gone up at a further 5%. Well, let's adjust that by 5 more percent, enter in those values, and as the actuals start to hit and reconcile, we can run that at a monthly cash flow level as well. So I've got my actuals running through up until June in this example. And here's my forecast, you know, expenditure for each of those specific categories over the remainder of the year. All the while, you know, that's updating my monthly and my annualized closing position just at a cash sense. But hopefully in the case of just minutes, you've been able to input a budget for the year, update some really key basic assumptions. We've got a plan now that's based on real data that really happened on this particular farm. And now we can keep tabs on it throughout the year as well. So hopefully by the process of setting it up just once, but then keeping an active eye on it and running it always in real time. And as those real data, you know, we're reconciling the bank transactions each month. As that's coming through, let's have a quick check on how that's comparing against what I'd planned. It's giving you that opportunity to be proactive because we're seeing it come through in real time, and then we can adjust it in real time and build it out for the year as well, without having to tailor it specifically client by client, doing it in a different spreadsheet in a different way. We know that whenever we save that particular report view, I can click that run button every month, and I know I'm looking at the same thing each time for that particular client. So we do see that being, you know, the real sort of quick, basic entry level point that not only offers something, that can be perceived as really, really high value, but then starts to gets the cogs turning to go, well, maybe I need to know a little bit more. Maybe I can start to analyze or adjust specific inputs, for the rest of the season coming up. And so that really starts to lead, obviously, into the intermediate planning, as we've got a bit more curiosity now, and we've got a bit more desire to maybe get a little bit more into the details.
Well,
As
and I
well.
think Mitchell and Aaron, another process that's helpful here with having, as you showed on the screen there, a good proactive budget is it sort of leads into tax planning. A lot of our CPAs out there in October, November, December, they get buried with a lot of what if tax planning. Well, if they have everything in there that's the actual plus the projected based on their budget, and they're pretty comfortable with that budget, that's going to tell you fairly quickly, well, here's where taxable income is going to be. Now we can do a little bit more where we're actually doing some planning services for the client versus doing compliance. So, that's a really powerful tool where we get to be that team player with them.
Yeah.
And we're not spending so much time just trying to, well, what about this? What about that? Well, it's already in the system, so to speak. It's just going to make our life a lot easier as a CPA, as an advisor.
Yeah, helping remove a lot
Exactly.
of that. And I believe there's always a place for the gut feeling.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
we're taking, we're backing up the gut feel with the real data as well.
Definitely. So kind of just to reemphasize that basic planning, very simple way to get into budgeting. And mostly because we directly integrate with the accounting tool. So you just need the P&L that's already in there. And then what you'll just need basically, their high level revenue and cost assumptions. You can produce everything Mitchell just showed you, which is pretty cool. So not that much information needed to be able to get some really insightful, valuable outputs. Now, for intermediate planning, that's definitely a step higher. It's going to be for those farming clients, crop or livestock that, they're actively tracking their yields and their input information. So they have pretty detailed production that they're tracking throughout the year. So information to need for the outputs we'll show you will be, they have a basic production plan. So they have specific yield assumptions and, detailed input costs per enterprise. So this intermediate planning, we think is, let's level up if you already are doing budgeting to be able to give it a more tailored ag view on, what exactly how their farm is doing. And then those outputs with the information you're provided from the farmer are pretty valuable. So you can do a profit per head or acre output that we have. You can do a more granular cash flow report with a number of different insights from the one we just showed you. And then you also will have, clear operational insights from the different profit centers on the farm. So, being able to answer questions like, how did your crops in 2024 actually do? What are your remaining bushels to sell? How did this livestock production do in accompaniment with that? So this level really helps drive the strategic advisory conversations. Like Paul mentioned, if you're doing the planning sessions already, you're doing that more efficiently. You can now ease into more of that production planning to optimize input decisions, manage price risk, precise cost control, because you're tracking all of that. So really, completely transform how you are as their strategic advisor. So Mitchell will show you now those few outputs I mentioned.
Yeah, 100%. And getting more into the details, like Aaron mentioned, we're looking to split things maybe up into an enterprise level now. In this example, I'm just focusing on a particular corn harvest for that year. But I've got entered in what are the acres, my expected yields and harvests, for the season that's been. We can also obviously forecast for this as well. So this example, we're looking a bit more at the actuals, but we can budget and plan for harvest as well and compare that to what really happened. What you then start to do though is you can allocate specific transactions into those harvest centers as well. So in this case, I'm looking at my monthly irrigation bill. I've allocated that water cost as it's been reconciled in the bank account. I can see what does that look like at a per unit level, at a per acre level, and then obviously just at a total dollar value. But then we can see these orange ones as well. That's indicating, my forecast for the rest of the year ahead as well. So back in that planning grid, I can allocate them straight into here to get a real quick idea of that, I guess that bottom up view and budget it in right here, but get it into a real tangible output that we can start to make some, assumptions or decisions on as well. So what that could start to look like. And as Aaron mentioned, we're going to slowly get more and more detail. We're going to get a bit more information coming in to build out these conversations. I've drilled into here some specific field information. Well, how does that work at $1 per acre and $1 per bushel level across that crop? And how does that look over the rest of the season as well? So I'm looking at estimated profits and break evens in a really tangible way, but taking that data that we've already got. We've reconciled the bank account, we've allocated it into that specific production center and getting an idea of our real per bushel understanding. If you look at livestock, obviously we're doing it at a per head level and inputting those movements from different cattle and livestock across the farm. Well, how do those real transactions allocate and getting an understanding of my gross profit over the rest of that year as well. So the key thing to obviously understand is that, we're really starting to get a detailed understanding at a high level of, where is the money actually going? There's something you always hear farmers might say, well, I feel like I've been told I made money at a P&L level, but there's nothing in the bank account. Well, let's actually allocate that information, see was one crop outperforming the other. Did we overspend on something that we hadn't particularly forecast, for that year? So it's just getting a little bit more granular, but only with this a little bit more production information to get to, again, all the stuff that we've already covered so far in basic planning, but now we're starting to get into some real farm specific tangible outputs that should hopefully allow you to go and make a decision, to support those clients over the course of a season and keep on top of it as well. Cool.
Awesome.
Aaron,
So I want to give a real example of kind of someone who utilized kind of intermediate planning to make a pretty huge decision. Was what one of our users basically here out west owned a super large ranch, pretty attractive land they owned, so constantly got offers on wanting to buy his operation and really felt that he was profitable. But an offer came along that he, really actually thought he should consider was, something beautiful would change his life. So used Figured to get nitty gritty into the numbers. Again, he felt he was profitable each year. And after throwing his whole operation into Figured, he realized he was not as profitable as he thought he was. And it actually made much more sense to sell his ranch, which he was going to be able to do, buy different land and continue ranching as a hobby over continuing his large operation, just because, the numbers don't lie. And we've talked about gut feeling today, but actually putting all of his costs input, entire balance sheet and Figured, especially at, a fair market value, he realized, I can actually have my cake and eat it too, which, probably wouldn't have been possible if he hadn't worked with his advisor and really got into the actual the data and the connection with his accounting platform. So
yeah,
just a real example from one of our users and their advisor that, just with a little bit more information and putting in time into maybe say a 5-year projection, you can tell, is what you're doing sustainable and profitable for you, that or could it be worth, investing in a different operation and be able to, retire and do this as a hobby instead. So yeah, pretty interesting one that we came across.
I think what was really cool with this one as well, Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were able to then support, I think, their kids into their own operations as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So he, of course, was, not wanting to sell because he was hoping to, have a succession plan and pass this along to his kids. But, the offer was attractive enough with what his operation was doing on a yearly basis that he then got to sell and then also invest in his family continuing on like he wanted to. So yeah, pretty cool. That I would say that example does kind of bleed into this more detailed forecasting growth-minded farms who are wanting tight financial oversight of their entire operations, is where we find detailed forecasting being, I would say, the most sustainable for, advisors to invest in with those types of clients. And then the information you're really going to need on top of what we shared already would be, their full financial history, a granular production plan, a current balance sheet to then to be able to do a fair market value. And then really all of that comprehensive data fuels a more sophisticated analysis. And then the outputs you'd be able to do is a, comprehensive cash flow forecast, a robust statement of position. So, a balance sheet at fair market value, and then a multi-scenario plan. So being able to, plot out a situation like I just mentioned, where it's, we have all of your information in history and all of your inputs, outputs. Let's build out a 5 to 10 year projection plan to, see how, if you keep on keeping on, what your finances will look like. So really just provides unparalleled foresight. And then I would say this level really drives those strategic advisory conversations. So long-term planning, crafting bank-ready financials, for major investments that are more prevalent with I would say larger farming operations, and then running sophisticated risk situations. So really you become indispensable to these types of farmers because you are building out such detailed plans, and they have their past, present, and future sitting with you in the platform to be able to refer back to at any time.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one tool where that starts to get, really prevalent, and actually even focus on the trackers still a little bit more as well, is getting into the granular details. If I want to start allocating into specific fields for a production year, even adjusting the sizes. If we know this year, actually we only planted out 80 acres in that particular field, let's get really detailed based on what we know is happening on farm, and allocate and expense and budget accordingly, to show those, really granular transactions, but also incredibly valuable and incredibly informative when you're trying to make some maybe larger strategic decisions as well. One tool really that probably touches on that the most, though, is obviously in scenarios, and this is where we can really get into that detailed 5-10 year succession planning, large scale asset purchases, anything like that. We can build out, using an opening balance sheet of today's proposition. What does a 5-year proposition look like if we want to purchase some land, obviously taking a bit more debt to do that, or larger asset purchases, leasing versus hiring, leasing versus purchasing, all those sorts of decisions as well. Well, how does that impact our bottom line over a 5-year plan as well? Maybe we need to revalue it, change in, different income assumptions based on market swings and anything like that. Build out, I guess, what are our estimated yields, estimated prices, all that sort of thing, in a really comprehensive, but in the same way, simple format. That means we can get to a series of outputs that let you go into the bank ready in a particular situation as well. So what are some of those key production indicators? How are we looking at against a benchmark of similar clients or people in that area as well? And then seeing our closing cash position, at end of each of those years, and how does my balance sheet look over each of that 5-year projection as well? Is what we're doing going to actually be a smart decision, or do we need to make some adjustments to make this, really fruitful and worthwhile as well? So that's that sort of real longer term, getting into the details of the future, or in the short term as well. Let's just build out where are we actually standing today on our balance sheet, and what does some of the cash positions look like in the case of an operating loan? Enter in what are the payments going to be, interest and principal structure. How does that impact my cash at the end of each month? And then looking at things like whether you do a hire purchase on a new asset, if you want to get that brand new harvester or that new tractor, is that going to have a major impact that could hamstring me for future opportunities? Am I better off just to hire the contractor this year and save up, for another particular season? So this is where you start to really answer those really detailed what if scenarios. But not only answering them based on, experience and maybe what had worked well in the past, we're also going to back them up with the real financial data and the real information that's been happening on your farm, and see, can we be profitable? Can we be more profitable? And can we look at other opportunities as well? So it gets really exciting when you start to be able to answer those what if questions, with really informed information in a really, exciting way that, as Aaron touched on as well, you become indispensable to your farmers as well, because you've got that commercial insight, you've got the data to back it up, and you're a key member of the farming team. It's our core belief with Figured as well, is that we want to bring the whole farming team together in that one space and one platform to make the best decisions for the longevity of a farming operation. Do you really want to?
Before you go into the disaster plan, I really like the idea that that farmers sort of understand contribution margin. I mean, there's multiple ways of stating what that is, but like one of your examples might be, hey, I have a opportunity to rent 300 new acres. Well, if I already have my actuals in there, I do a what if based on these 300 acres. Here's my original profit if I didn't do it. Here I plug in the yield, I plug in the revenue, I plug in the costs related to that. And very quickly, Figure is going to be able to let you know, hey, your profit before you did this was X. Your profit after doing this, projected profit, is going to be Y. And if that difference between X and Y is fairly good, yeah, I should go ahead and do it. Because a lot of times I hear people say, well, that neighbor rented that ground and he's paying way too much, or she's paying way too much. Well, based on contribution margin, it was still a smart investment for them to go ahead and do that. Whereas this very easily tells you what that is going to be versus trying to do it in a spreadsheet format.
Yeah, I think that's we're actually just a little bit short on time, but Paul, that's a prime example. That's actually almost better than a disaster planning example, where you can go into it and you've got the data there to say this is a smart decision, and this is why we're doing it. So, no, it's exciting, and those are the conversations that we all love to have as well. Maybe Paul, just to keep it on you, would you mind maybe just sharing a couple of insights on things, maybe we should be looking out for, or maybe wanting to consider over the next few months as advisors, heading into the summer?
And I think the one thing that I've been finding out myself is the AI is getting better and better. I mean, I'm sure Figured is looking at it. I'm actually using it on my farm tax update material. It saves time for me. I almost feel like, am I going to become obsolete? I don't think so, because it still isn't always accurate, but it saves time. It saves a lot of effort that I don't have to do anymore. And I think that's going to be more and more true as we look forward on the budgeting process, especially trying to project out 5-10 years down the road. If I make this decision, AI can do all the number crunching behind the scene and give us a very good answer very quickly versus trying to do it with a spreadsheet. And Aaron and Mitchell, we all know you make one little error in a spreadsheet, suddenly the whole thing's wrong. Whereas, if you have it where it's sort of bulletproof, hopefully that's you're going to have a lot more confidence in that projection.
100%. That touches on a lot of these as well. It's the power of that proactive data. We know that it's there in real time, but we can trust where it's come from. We know the source. It wasn't something keyed into a spreadsheet that Jimbo pulled off the top of his head. It's real data, it's real information. And as you touched on, Paul, I think there's going to be an evolving role for the CPA. AI is a massive focus for us, obviously. But I don't see it as a tool. We don't want to be scared of it, because it's not going to replace people. We still want to have those conversations, be engaged, be supporting those.
Well, it allows us to do what we want to do. I mean, we want to be able to be an advisor, not a compliance person. So I definitely, I wish I was 20 years younger. So
I'm not sure AI is going to be able to do that, but
No, it's all about getting time back in a day. And, there's going to be it's helping build that long-term resilience as well.
Hmm.
And it's resilience
Empowering
based on
conversations. Yeah.
data and information as well. So awesome. Well, we did have one very quick poll question just for everyone on the call today. Let me launch it really quickly. Cool. And yeah, it's just sort of based on what we've seen so far. What sort of planning and stages do you think, your clients could be getting started at? It's a multi-choice if you think you've got a range as well. But feel free to answer based on, what you've seen and there, and maybe we can look at a few more ways to help you out on that as well. So awesome. A few answers coming through there. Thank you, everyone. I think there's a pretty exciting time to be involved in financial management, particularly in agriculture as well, because there's a lot of changes out there. There's a lot of uncertainty, but let's use some tools that can help us, make the best, most informed decision as well. But as a team, it's not going to be everyone trying to do their own things on the side or whatever it might be. There's a chance for us to be being really clever and working really well together going forward as well. So awesome. Thanks everyone for jumping onto that poll. Awesome.
Yeah, and just
So
to
next steps.
Yeah, let's touch on next steps and just to be conscious of time. You want to go on to the next one, Mitch? We know we've covered a lot today. Touched on the platform, the outputs you can do, covered, some insights with Paul. We do have a free guide for CPAs. You're welcome to scan this QR code or to download a copy, but really goes into a lot more detail, farm financial planning and budgeting at scale for those here today. A lot of our partners have found it useful and it is free, so feel free to explore that. And then we did want to give Paul an opportunity to plug his podcast if y'all aren't aware of it. So Paul, I'll give you a sec to tell them a little bit
Okay,
more.
yeah. So again, Top Producer Podcast actually came out today. It comes out every Tuesday typically. And then also my blog that, I've had two blogs in my life, I guess Farm CPA Today, but really what I focus in on now is Farm CPA Report. Matter of fact, this morning I have a post on the Senate tax proposals that came out yesterday, just sort of a recap. And actually probably tomorrow or Thursday, I'll be coming out with sort of a guide that shows the side by side exactly what the House proposal was and what the Senate proposal is, if different. So just
Okay,
just
cool.
quick little plug there.
Yeah,
Awesome.
no, thanks, Paul. We know everyone who's listened to your podcast has found it super helpful. So if you haven't taken a listen, please do. And then lastly, if you do want to connect with Mitch and I, we'd love to talk with any of you further. We can always dive deeper into the platform or talk to you about building out a service line that includes budgeting or forecasting. So really here to answer any questions and discuss how Figure could be a solution for you, or just talk about ag today and what y'all are facing as farmers advisors. But you can scan that QR code and it'll lead directly to our calendars. Awesome. Well, thanks so much all for joining us. And Paul, we always appreciate your time and love talking with you. Please, if you had any, it didn't look like we didn't get any questions in the chat that we didn't answer. But if you do have any that come up, please feel free to reach out and take a listen to Paul's podcast. I've loved every single one I've listened to.
You need to get a better life, Aaron. So
I know I need to find something else. No, it's
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
taught me so much. So
Well,
appreciate
good.
you always publishing those.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your day.